The National Consumer Commission has announced massive vehicle safety recalls across the country since January 2026. The NCC recalled more than 30,000 across several major automotive brands. And according to the NCC, the scale of these recalls reveals a systematic failure and weakness in vehicle pre-market quality assurance, manufacturing oversight and regulatory verification. In 2025, the NCC recalled more than 50,000 vehicles. Although vehicle recalls currently serve an essential role in addressing latent safety defects, they're inherently reactive in their nature and therefore inadequate as a safeguard. The NCC says recall notices often arrive too late when defective vehicles are already in circulation, driven by unsuspecting motorists. All right, let's chat a bit about this now. Let's bring in Pheto Ntaba, who is the National Consumer Commission Spokesperson. Pheto, thank you very much for joining us here on SABC News. I mean, it's quite shocking if we look at the statistics that I just read out, and if we put that into perspective, we're talking about a recall of about 3 or 4 brands per week. Am I correct in saying that? I mean, the numbers are quite startling. These are cars that are not supposed to be on the road, that have defects, that are in circulation, and we're talking about 4 to 5 brands per week.
A minimum of 4 to 5 brands a week, Griselda. When you look at what we announced last week, I think it was we had about 4 different brands, different defects. And when you look at the years again, they've been in circulation for quite some time. It is quite concerning, though at times we would go for like a week or 2 without any recall, which is a good thing. But knowing that there's a possibility of a vehicle that is not safe on the road, it is quite concerning on the side of the NCC. That is why we have heightened our communication. Immediately when we receive a notification, we inform consumers while we engage with these different manufacturers, including the OEMs themselves, the ones who manufacture different parts. Our engagements are ongoing just to really understand what is the issue, where are the gaps, so that we can bring in other regulators. We are in constant conversation with the NRCS, for example, the Automobile Association and other regulators or role players in the space to try by all means to protect South African consumers.
Yeah, and I mean, there should be consequences for something like this. I mean, this is something that's likely to startle, some of the road users or motorists themselves. What measures are being put in place to be tougher on these manufacturers to somewhat get it right before these vehicles with defects are put on the road, which is incredibly dangerous?
The most unfortunate part, Griselda, when you look at some of the recalls that we announce, it's when those vehicles are already in the hands of the consumers and they've been driving those vehicles for quite some time. There's an element of resistance on the other side, on the side of the consumer, where one would say, I've been driving this car for quite some time, it has not given me any problem. But in terms of the Consumer Protection Act, when we monitor recalls, part of monitoring is to check when did they identify the problem, when did they inform the regulators, what did they do in the process, are there any reports and all that. So our engagements are ongoing. We started an assessment last year towards the end of 2025.
Yeah.
We are almost done with that assessment, whereby we will then go back to these manufacturers and say, there was a lack here in terms of informing regulators or consumers, and if there is, something like that, that's why we'll then take steps against that particular manufacturer. But for now, we are still monitoring these recalls and collecting as much information as possibly, so that when we go back to other regulators, we also look at international standards. When we go back to regulators, we say, here are the gaps. This is where we need to tighten our laws or our regulations so that we can further protect consumers.
Yeah, and Pheto, I mean, why does it seem, at least, that there is delayed detection, with safety faults often surfacing years after the vehicles have been sold? And I mean, this is across, model years in terms of cars.
Certainly, regardless of the size of the vehicle, Griselda, we have seen vehicles from far back, 2020, 2012, for example, where an issue was, Takata airbags. 2017, for example, as announced during the course of the week. So some of the responses are they see these wear and these defects over time due to wear and tear, because a product will pass the specification, it would leave the dealership, they will tick all the boxes. But over time, as drivers continue using the vehicle or continue driving the car, that's where then they will, identify these defects. So part of our engagements is to say to them, now you know the lifespan of a vehicle, possible lifespan. It's not your 3 years, it's not your 4 years. Let's get to a point whereby when these products or these components are produced, they must tie to the lifespan of the vehicle where is possible, so that we minimize potential risks that consumers might encounter while driving these vehicles. I mean, you talk about an engine, for example. You
Yeah.
talk about a possibility of fire. You talk about brakes, steering wheels, and all that. Those are serious components of safety components of a vehicle.
Yeah.
So that's part of our engagement, and we don't want to rush these engagements or our assessment as the NCC. We want to get it right, so that when you go back to other role players, to the industry, we say this is what we have identified, and this is a way forward, or this is what we are proposing as a way forward.
Yeah, and I mean, the onus for acting on, recall notices often rests on the consumer, to monitor those notices. Many motorists remain unaware or even sometimes uninformed of these faults, leaving these known defects unresolved and, the risk unmitigated.
Risks are unmitigated, Griselda, in a case where a consumer receives a notification from their dealership saying there's a defect or your car is part of a recall. Consumers at times would decide to ignore that particular notification for reasons known to them, consumers, making it slightly difficult for the NCC really to finalize the recall, so that we can we can get like a full picture in as far as that particular recall. So we really urge consumers to say, when a recall is announced, whether you know that your car is affected or not, for as long it meets certain specs, the brand name, the year model, do ensure that you check your car in to minimize any potential risks that might come with that particular recall. You will only know once you take your vehicle, for assessment. You will only know.
Yeah, and the NCC, plays a coordinating role, in issuing these recall notices, but it does not conduct, any tests or pre-market certification of all vehicles before they're market released. So does this make then oversight partial and places over-reliance on the manufacturer self-reporting to identify and disclose these faults? Isn't that also where the problem may lie?
That could be a possibility, Griselda. However, we have a regulator strictly looking at specifications. There are certain specifications or components that manufacturers or other, commodities need to comply with. National Regulator for Compulsory Specifications. Those are compulsory specifications. Hence, we cannot really close a recall without engaging with NRCS. So even the manufacturers, they know very well, before taking any car, to the road, there are certain steps like your homologation, for example, and other aspects to ensure that that particular vehicle, all the components meet the minimum required specifications. But unfortunately, we still see recalls where the manufacturer would say, a particular component was, or bolts, for example, were outside the specification. So it's around specification where when a component fails, it then means that it did not meet the specification from the get-go, or the issue of quality, or the issue of timing, that it was meant to work for a particular period while the vehicle itself is still on the road for more years. So that's part of our engagement, to say, if there are gaps in as far as our laws are concerned, we now need to come in and say, how do we ensure that we tighten those gaps? Our role, yes, we come in when a product is in the hands of the consumer. Once it hits the market, that's when we come in. And that's why you would find out at times when they announce a recall, if it's a car, it's still with them.
Yeah.
It's still with the manufacturer. But once it hits the market, that's where we come in and say, remove those cars from the market so that we protect consumers and fix those vehicles.
Yeah, but some experts say, the shortcomings of the recall models, are further compounded by the absence of an independent automotive testing authority in the country, to assess or test vehicle safety before market release. Is that one of, or a fair conclusion to make?
Look, we do have these entities. We have your automobile, for example, AA, where they come in. I think what we are doing right now is to coordinate ourselves. As government and independent, associations to say, how best do we now work together? Because we have seen that, yes, they would say it met the specification, tests were done, but you are right. Maybe we need an independent testing authority or regulator or even an association to ensure that we take safety of these vehicles to another level. Because yes, it might miss the specification, but at some point it fails. And then the question is, why did it fail? Well, initially it met the specification. So that's why initially I said our conversation, we start with the OEMs, we then go to other regulators and associations in the industry. And again, Griselda, we don't want to rush this process. We want to get it right so that when we go to the ministries, different ministers, we say, this is what we have identified and this is what is lacking in the value chain to ensure that consumers are protected.
Pheto Ntaba, thank you very much indeed. We do appreciate your time here on SABC News. Thanks for joining us this Sunday morning, in fact, from the National Consumer Commission, the communications, responsible for communications there. Thank you very much indeed. We do appreciate your time.